Hey friends. Well, we had a lovely Thanksgiving dinner yesterday. Wonderful kickoff to the holiday season, feels like. Hope you all did as well. I woke up this morning with some thoughts kicking around my head. This is coming out of a book that I've begun reading called Positive Discipline, and I think I mentioned it on this post. It's all about how to create healthy structure for kids and helpful boundaries and a kind of like middle way between the kind of traditional two polarities of child rearing philosophy, which is basically highly disciplinarian, or permissiveness, neither of which really works. Some of them may have worked at various points in the past, but they don't work now. And so this is a book about finding another way of creating structure and rigor. And one of the things that the author touches on, as a matter of course in discussing how different children respond to not just the parents and the structure of their lives, but all other people, all relationships, is their birth order. And as I started to listen to some of the descriptions of how a particular place in a birth order often results in a certain kind of personality, relationship, sense of meaning, sense of identity and significance. It's a question of how do we create meaning and significance for ourselves. And birth order, it's kind of uncanny to take a close look at the way that birth order, this is pretty well researched. So and they're very clear. The author is very clear about there's nothing set in stone about this, and in fact these relationships can flip around, they can move, especially as you get into more and more, the firstborn is kind of is sort of a more easily defined position because it's less complex. And then as you get down into, further into however many kids a family has, the more complex the relationships become as second of four, third of five, fourth of five or six or whatever, depending on how big the family is, you can get into these really, but they've done a pretty remarkable job of mapping what some of those tendencies are and what some of the outgrowths are of the order in which we came into the world relative to our siblings. And this, it's something that as soon as I started reading this portion of the book, as soon as we got to this chapter, I started to have these little flares go off about, like for example, my relationship with my wife. We are both firstborns. I technically have an older brother, but he's from a previous marriage, and I didn't really grow up with him, so I grew up in my household as the oldest. And when I look at the way that Katie and I have certain tendencies of firstborns, I'm like, oh, that makes total sense. And these are things that they can obviously both create resonance and a kind of compatibility, complementarity. They can also create conflict. They can create competition. I'm not saying that they create competition in my relationship with Katie, but the factors that go into, for example, a firstborn often feels like they have to assert themselves. They have to sort of be number one. And it's really interesting to look at my own life and sort of and feel that, because I when I look at my own life and my kind of like subconscious, very, very subconscious template of the world, I see a lot of that. And as somebody who's, I've been incredibly interested in kind of spiritual development, in personal evolution, in psychological growth, and creating a sort of healthy relationship to the world. It's something that I am passionate about. It's interesting to observe that throughout all of that kind of work, there can still persist an underlying kind of substrate that frames even that level of work. Even when we're talking about the work of meditation and dissolving ego and really letting go a lot of these patterns, which is absolutely possible, and I've talked about it a ton on this post, and it's something that it's absolutely not just possible, but it's, I think, in a lot of ways, I feel like one of the most valuable pursuits we can undertake in our life is to unravel and dissolve some of our conditioning, some of our karma, some of our programming, so that we gain autonomy, we gain actual choice. Because it's not, a highly successful life that is at the same time totally kind of driven by patterns that we're not aware of, is not going to feel like a successful life. It's going to feel like an enslaved life, because it is. We're not, if we're not free of our own programming, then we're not free of anything. Then there's no freedom to be found. There's no such thing as freedom. You can put someone who, if we're totally enthralled to our own programming, then it doesn't matter where you put me. You can put me in a dictatorship, you can put me in a free country. The conditions of my life may change drastically, but my actual ultimate freedom as an individual won't change at all, because that's actually not down to the political system that I live in. It's down to how much do I understand, how much am I conscious of my own programming, and how much of that programming have I chosen. So seeing something like the competitiveness of a firstborn kind of persisting through so much of my life, so much of me, so much of my personality. It's like it really makes me kind of, it just makes me take a step back, and it makes me go, okay, is this something I can access? Is this, I guess it just brought it online as a layer of programming to kind of observe and to make part of the picture of the programming that I'm consistently spending time observing and coming to in meditation and trying to get a little objectivity from, take a little step back from, gain a little perspective on. But I would encourage everybody, positive discipline, even if you don't have kids. It's an interesting examination of the kind of some of the very earliest programming that we have. If we come from a family with siblings, that sequence and even the number of years between kids makes a big difference in terms of whether, how much of the identity has formed before we're accommodating another human being in our space who's drawing on our parental resources. Little kind of subtle changes or small changes in the timing of things, and I'm sure gender makes a difference. They don't really talk about that in terms of the birth order chapter. The difference between kids of the same gender being however many years apart or being different genders. I'm not sure that they didn't. It's not something that the author has spoken too much about, but I'll bet that somebody out there has researched this and kind of, maybe seen some interesting patterns. But I guess for me, my two big takeaways are: one, let me get a little deeper into this and see really kind of what my own programming in this area might be, because like I said, I truly notice some of the ways in which Katie and I are similar in some ways in our relationships with our siblings. Not the same, not identical, but there's some kind of meta patterns that I've observed, and it's interesting. It's not just personality. I think it's absolutely down to both of us being firstborns. So that's something that feels like an area where where a little bit of awareness might go a long way towards having choice, having agency over the way that I operate. And then, in my own family, among my actual siblings, I sense that being more conscious, not just of my own programming, of the way that I kind of like automatedly do my thing, but using the kind of insight from this to actually kind of have an empathy or a sensitivity or just an ability to kind of decode their maybe subconscious, it's somewhat involuntary kind of programming in some ways. It also feels like it could be helpful and healthy, and because again, most of this behavior, it makes total sense and it's adaptive and it's helpful in some ways at a certain age. Whether or not it's healthy, whether or not we would say it's long-term healthy programming, it serves a function at a certain point in our life. So it's doing its job as far as evolution goes. This kind of programming is performing a certain kind of service that at that point in our lives we feel we need performed. But man, does it wear out fast. And man, can it hang on way past when we have any use for it or have any real, or it's not contributing any benefit to our lives. It's just conditioning us to see the world a certain way, see other people a certain way, feel a certain way about ourselves. And the more we can let that go. Certainly, I look at myself and I'm like, the more I can let that go, the more free I will be, and the more my life will be an outgrowth of my choices, of my true, deep, authentic choices, rather than my response to my younger brother from 40 odd years ago, you know. Why is that relevant? It's not. That's over. That is not the situation anymore. Whatever that programming is, it's like running, you know, I don't know, whatever the operating system on the Apple Classic was nowadays. Not the most efficient system to be running. Anyway, that's where I am. That's where I am today, folks. One day after Thanksgiving. Right back to questioning my programming. Thanks for watching. Much love. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. I'll see you soon.